I never thought that building a small dock on the lake behind my house would lead to a 4-year legal battle, thousands of dollars in fines, and eventually owning an entire community's water access rights. But when you're up against Patricia Wilkins, the most ruthless HOA president in all of Lake County, Illinois, things tend to spiral out of control. My name is Brian Daniels, and this is how I went from being an ordinary homeowner to becoming the guy who took down Lakeshore Estates' tyrannical homeowners association. It all started on a perfect June morning in 2021. I'd purchased my dream home in Lakeshore Estates the previous winter, a charming 3-bedroom colonial with a gorgeous backyard that sloped down to Lake Michigan. The house had everything I wanted, including lake access, which was the main selling point for me. I'm an avid fisherman, and the idea of walking out my back door and casting a line within minutes was irresistible. After settling in for a few months, I decided it was time to build a small dock. Nothing fancy, just a simple wooden structure where I could tie up a future small boat and sit with my morning coffee. I checked the property survey that came with my closing documents, confirmed that the waterfront portion was indeed part of my property, and got to work. I spent 2 weekends cutting, measuring, and securing the boards. My neighbor, Howard Thompson, even helped me for an afternoon. When it was finished, I had a modest 12-foot dock extending into the lake, simple, sturdy, and exactly what I wanted. 3 days later, I found a neon orange violation notice stuck to my front door. Unauthorized structure constructed without HOA approval. Immediate removal required. $500 fine assessed. I was confused. I'd read through the HOA documents when I purchased the house, and while they mentioned needing approval for visible home modifications, I didn't recall anything about docks specifically. Besides, the lake access was one of the main selling points of the community. The next morning, I called the number on the violation notice. A cheerful voice answered. Lakeshore Estates HOA office, this is Melissa speaking. Hi Melissa, this is Brian Daniels at 47 Lakefront Drive. I received a violation notice about my dock and I'd like to discuss it. Oh yes, Mr. Daniels. Let me transfer you to Mrs. Wilkins, our board president. She's handling all dock violations personally. After a brief hold, a sharp voice cut through the line. Patricia Wilkins speaking. You must be the gentleman who built the unauthorized structure on community property. It's not on community property, I replied calmly. It's on my property. I checked the survey before building. Patricia's laugh was cold and practiced. Mr. Daniels, perhaps you're new to living in an HOA community, but all lakefront access is community property at Lakeshore Estates. Your property line ends 6 feet from the water's edge. This is clearly stated in the community bylaws. I frowned. That wasn't mentioned when I purchased the house. My survey shows. Your survey is irrelevant, she interrupted. The HOA covenants supersede any individual property lines when it comes to the lake. The fine stands, and you have 7 days to remove the dock before additional fines accumulate at $100 per day. I felt my blood pressure rising but kept my tone level. I'd like to see where exactly this is documented. Can you point me to the specific bylaw? Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Lakeshore Estates Covenants and Restrictions. I suggest you read your paperwork more carefully, Mr. Daniels. Have a nice day. She hung up before I could respond. That evening, I dug through the mountain of closing documents until I found the HOA covenants. Sure enough, buried in the middle of the 47-page document was a paragraph stating that all property within 6 feet of the waterline constitutes a community easement for resident lake access. However, it said nothing about the HOA actually owning that land, just that there was an easement for access. The next day, I drove to the county recorder's office. After explaining my situation to a helpful clerk named Hannah, she pulled up the original plat for Lakeshore Estates from when the development was built in 1978. This is interesting, Hannah said, pointing at the screen. According to the original development plans, the lake itself wasn't included in the community property. It was retained by the original owner, Westlake Development Corporation. So the HOA doesn't own the lake, I asked. Not according to this. They have an easement for access, but ownership of the lake itself wasn't transferred to the HOA. She scrolled through more documents. Let me see if there was a later transfer. No, nothing here. The lake property should have been transferred to someone when Westlake Development dissolved in 1994. Hannah helped me request a complete title search on the lake property itself. It would take a few days, but I was already feeling more confident. I thanked her and headed home, stopping to take photos of my dock and the surrounding shoreline. When I got home, I found another notice on my door, this time informing me that 4 days remained until additional fines would be assessed. Attached was a printed photo of my dock with the words "unauthorized structure" written across it in red marker. It seemed childish and petty, especially since I now suspected the HOA had no actual authority over the lake. I decided to respond formally. I drafted a letter stating that I was investigating the property boundaries and requested a 30-day hold on any fines until the matter could be resolved. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office the next morning, where Melissa accepted it with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Wilkins won't like this," she whispered. "She's very particular about lake violations." "Why is that?" I asked. Melissa glanced around, then leaned closer. "She lives in the big house on Oakview Lane, no lake access. She's been fighting with lakefront homeowners for years." That explained a lot. Classic case of someone wielding what little power they had to compensate for what they didn't have. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. My request for a delay was denied, and the fines would begin accumulating as scheduled. Additionally, the board had voted to increase the daily fine to $200 due to my confrontational attitude and refusal to comply. I called the county recorder's office, hoping for good news. Hannah answered immediately. "Brian, I was just about to call you. The title search came back with some interesting findings." After Westlake Development dissolved, the lake property was supposed to transfer to the HOA, but the paperwork was never filed correctly. Technically, the lake has been in a sort of ownership limbo for the past 27 years. "So no one actually owns it?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. "Well, that's where it gets complicated. In cases like this, ownership can sometimes default to adjacent property owners under riparian rights laws. Since your property directly abuts the lake, you might have a claim to the portion behind your home." I thanked Hannah and immediately called a real estate attorney. Jason Whitmore specialized in property disputes and had handled several cases involving HOAs. He agreed to meet with me the following day. Meanwhile, the 7 days had passed, and true to their word, the HOA began adding $200 daily fines to my account. I took photos of my mailbox, which now received daily violation notices, each one printed on increasingly brighter colored paper. Jason's office was downtown with a view of the actual Lake Michigan. I brought all my documentation, including the original survey, HOA covenants, and the information Hannah had provided. After reviewing everything, Jason sat back and smiled. "You might have something here, Brian. Illinois follows the common law doctrine of riparian rights, which means lakefront property owners typically have certain rights to the adjacent water. If the lake ownership was never properly transferred to the HOA, we could potentially establish your ownership of the portion behind your property." "What about the fines?" I asked. "Let's put those on hold for now. I'll send a cease and desist letter regarding the fines until the ownership question is resolved. They can't fine you for building on property they don't control." True to his word, Jason sent a strongly worded legal letter the next day. The daily notices stopped immediately, but the existing fines, now totaling over $1,700, remained on my account. 2 days later, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney, Martin Graves. It stated that the HOA maintained its position that all lakefront property was under their jurisdiction, regardless of any administrative oversights in the property records. They were willing to generously reduce my fine to $500 if I removed the dock immediately and signed a document acknowledging their authority over the lake. I forwarded the letter to Jason, who called me immediately. "This is good," he said. "They're acknowledging there's an issue with the records. I think we should push forward with establishing your riparian rights. It'll take some time, but if we're successful, you'll have legal ownership of the lake portion behind your property." What does that mean exactly? It means you control that section of the lake. You can build your dock, boat there, fish there, and yes, potentially restrict others from using it. I whistled. That seems extreme. I don't want to keep people from enjoying the lake. It's leverage, Jason explained. If the HOA wants to play hardball, we'll have a strong negotiating position. Over the next few weeks, Jason filed the necessary paperwork to establish my riparian rights. The process was complex, involving surveys, historical property records, and various legal filings. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to insist that I remove my dock, though they stopped adding new fines. I decided to do some research on Patricia Wilkins. Through neighborhood gossip and some public records searches, I learned that she had been HOA president for 8 years running. During that time, the association had filed 17 lawsuits against homeowners and collected over $150,000 in fines. Most cases involved lakefront properties, confirming what Melissa had hinted at. Patricia seemed to have a vendetta against those with water access. Summer turned to fall, and my case slowly proceeded through the legal system. I kept using my dock, defiantly sitting there with my morning coffee despite occasional drive-bys from Patricia in her white Lexus SUV. She would slow down, glare at me from behind designer sunglasses, then speed away. In October, Jason called with news. The initial hearing is scheduled for November 15th. The judge will review our petition to establish your riparian rights. The HOA has filed a motion to dismiss, claiming they have historical control of the lake. Do they have a case? I asked. It's weak. They're relying on the fact that they've been regulating the lake for decades without challenge. But actual ownership trumps historical practice. On November 15th, I put on my best suit and met Jason at the Lake County Courthouse. To my surprise, not only was Patricia there with her attorney, but so were about 20 other Lakeshore Estates residents. Word had spread about my challenge to the HOA's authority. Judge Caroline Martinez called the hearing to order. Jason presented our case first, meticulously detailing the ownership history of the lake, the failure to properly transfer the property, and my riparian rights as an adjacent property owner. Martin Graves then presented the HOA's position, arguing that despite any paperwork anomalies, the HOA had effectively managed the lake for decades, establishing de facto control. He presented photos of other lakefront properties without docks, claiming the consistent enforcement of dock prohibition. Judge Martinez asked several pointed questions, particularly about why the HOA believed it could assess fines for structures on property it couldn't prove it owned. Graves stammered through a response about community aesthetics and property values. After both sides presented, the judge announced she would review all documentation and issue a ruling within 30 days. As we left the courtroom, several neighbors approached me. "I hope you win," whispered Alina Jameson, who lived 3 doors down from me. "They fined me $800 last year for putting in a water garden near the shoreline." "Patricia's been using the HOA like her personal fiefdom," added Robert Chen, another lakefront homeowner. "No one's had the guts to challenge her until now." As December arrived, so did snow and Judge Martinez's ruling. Jason called me at work, his voice excited. "We won the first round. The judge has established your riparian rights to the portion of lake behind your property, extending to the center of the lake." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, still processing. It means you legally own that water area. The judge also ordered the HOA to cease issuing any fines related to your dock and to rescind the existing fines. I was elated, but knew this wasn't the end. Sure enough, 3 days later, the HOA filed an appeal and sent a community-wide email about fighting to protect our shared lake resources from selfish individual interests. Winter passed slowly, with legal filings going back and forth. The appeal was scheduled for a hearing in April 2022. Meanwhile, I noticed something interesting. Several of my lakefront neighbors began building small docks of their own. The HOA issued violation notices, but no one was removing their docks. My stand had inspired a small rebellion. In February, I received an unexpected visit from Melissa, the HOA office assistant. She nervously handed me a thick folder. "I could get fired for this," she said quietly, "but people need to know what's happening." Inside the folder were HOA financial records, showing that over $80,000 of collected fines had been redirected to board discretionary projects over the past 5 years. Most notably, $32,000 had been spent on lakefront beautification, directly behind Patricia's non-lakefront property, essentially creating a private access point for her home while denying actual lakefront homeowners the same privilege. I immediately sent the documents to Jason, who was as shocked as I was. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," he said. "This could be embezzlement or misappropriation of funds. We should amend our case." The April appeal hearing took on new significance. Jason presented not only our original argument about riparian rights, but also introduced the financial evidence showing Patricia's misuse of HOA funds. The HOA's attorney attempted to have this evidence dismissed as irrelevant to the property dispute, but Judge Martinez allowed it, noting that it spoke to the HOA's motives and credibility. By this point, nearly half the community attended the hearing. The atmosphere was tense, with clear divisions between Patricia's supporters and those hoping to see the HOA's power checked. Judge Martinez upheld the original ruling, confirming my ownership of the lake portion behind my property. Furthermore, she ordered a forensic audit of the HOA's financial records and referred the potential misappropriation of funds to the district attorney's office. As we left the courthouse, Patricia cornered me in the parking lot. Her face was flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "I've spent years making Lakeshore Estates a premium community, and you're destroying it over a ridiculous dock." "This isn't about the dock anymore, Patricia," I replied calmly. "This is about you using the HOA to control people and redirect funds for your personal benefit. You'll regret this," she said, before storming off to her Lexus. I did regret it briefly when I woke up the next morning to find my dock had been partially dismantled overnight. Several boards had been pried up, and someone had spray-painted Community Lake across the remaining structure. I called the police and filed a report, showing them my court documentation proving my ownership of that section of the lake. They took photos and promised to investigate, though we all knew proving who had vandalized the dock would be difficult. Word of the vandalism spread quickly through the neighborhood. That afternoon, something remarkable happened. About 15 neighbors showed up at my house with lumber, tools, and coolers of beer. "We heard what happened," said Howard Thompson. "Thought you could use some help rebuilding." By sunset, my dock was not only repaired but improved with a wider platform and a small bench. As we all sat enjoying beers and the sunset, Howard raised his bottle in a toast. "To Brian, the man who proved you can fight City Hall or at least an overzealous HOA," everyone laughed and cheered. For the first time since moving in, I felt like part of a community. The feeling was short-lived. The next day, every person who had helped rebuild my dock received an HOA violation notice for interfering with community property. The fines ranged from $200 to $500. Jason filed an emergency motion with the court, citing the HOA's continued harassment despite the court ruling. Judge Martinez issued a temporary restraining order prohibiting the HOA from issuing any lakefront-related fines until the forensic audit was complete. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office began investigating Patricia and the HOA board for financial improprieties. They subpoenaed bank records and interviewed current and former board members. Summer arrived, and lake usage hit its peak. With the restraining order in place, more lakefront homeowners built docks, installed water features, and generally enjoyed their property without fear of fines. Patricia was notably absent from community events, and rumors circulated that she was house hunting in another county. In August, the forensic audit results were released, and they were damning. Over the past decade, approximately $217,000 in HOA funds had been misappropriated. While some went to the lakefront improvements behind Patricia's house, other funds had paid for personal trips, classified as community research, and renovations to board members' homes, documented as model property improvements. Based on these findings, the district attorney charged Patricia and 2 other board members with embezzlement and fraud. They were arrested in a deliberately low-key operation, no sirens or drawn weapons, just officers arriving at their doors with warrants. An emergency community meeting was called to elect an interim HOA board. To my surprise, several neighbors nominated me. I reluctantly agreed to serve, with the condition that we would completely revise the HOA structure and regulations. By fall, we had drafted new bylaws that significantly limited the HOA's power, particularly regarding fines and architectural controls. We also established clear lake usage rights based on the court's riparian rights ruling lakefront homeowners owned their section of the lake, but granted general access rights to all community members. Patricia and the other board members eventually accepted a plea deal, avoiding jail time but agreeing to pay restitution and perform community service. Patricia sold her house and moved to Arizona, according to neighborhood gossip. The most satisfying moment came in October 2022, when the new HOA board, which I reluctantly chaired, held a community dock building workshop. Over 20 families participated, constructing small, standardized docks along the lakefront. We finished the day with a community barbecue on the shoreline, the first of what would become an annual tradition. By spring 2023, the legal battles were finally behind us. The court formally recognized the riparian rights of all lakefront property owners, while our new HOA agreements ensured community access. We established a lake maintenance fund, transparently managed and audited annually. My dock became something of a neighborhood landmark. I added Adirondack chairs and solar lights, and neighbors would often stop by during evening walks. I never turned anyone away, though I did install a small, humorous sign: "Privately owned dock, publicly welcomed friends." The final chapter in this saga came in May 2024, when I received a letter from the county assessor's office. Due to the established riparian rights, my property value had increased by nearly 20%. While this meant higher property taxes, it also represented a significant gain in my investment, all because I stood up to an overzealous HOA. Last weekend, I hosted a 3-year anniversary party celebrating what neighbors now jokingly call the Dock Rebellion. Over 30 families attended, bringing food, drinks, and stories of their own HOA confrontations. Howard Thompson, who had become a close friend through all this, raised his glass for a toast. 3 years ago, Brian built a simple dock and inadvertently exposed years of HOA corruption. Today, we have a community that actually feels like one. Here's to standing your ground and knowing where the property lines actually are. Everyone laughed, and I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things might have gone if I had simply removed the dock when first ordered to. Sometimes, the right thing to do is comply and avoid conflict. Other times, you need to hold your ground, especially when you're standing on property you legally own, looking out at a lake that, according to court documents, is partially yours too. As sunset painted the lake in brilliant orange and pink, I sat on my infamous dock, watching neighbors chat and children play along the shoreline. The new docks dotting the lakefront weren't just wooden structures, they were symbols of a community that had found its voice and reclaimed its rights. I've since learned that our case has been cited in 3 other HOA disputes across Illinois. Homeowners are increasingly challenging unreasonable restrictions and financial irregularities, armed with the precedent we established in Lakeshore Estates. The forensic accountant who reviewed our HOA's books told me something I'll never forget. In 15 years of auditing community associations, I've never seen a case where challenging a simple fine led to uncovering such extensive financial abuse. He estimated that without my challenge, the misappropriation might have continued for years, potentially totaling millions. This past spring, we replaced the old Lakeshore Estates entrance sign with a new one. Underneath the community name, it now reads, "A resident-governed community." It's a small change in wording but represents a fundamental shift in philosophy. I still serve on the HOA board, though I've made it clear this will be my last year. We've established term limits, transparent financial practices, and a dispute resolution process that emphasizes mediation over fines. Our quarterly meetings, once sparsely attended affairs dominated by Patricia's monologues, are now well-attended community discussions. The legal bills from this ordeal were substantial, nearly $35,000 all told. However, the court ordered the HOA and ultimately its insurance to cover most of my costs after the financial misdeeds came to light. I paid about $8,000 out of pocket, which I consider a worthwhile investment in justice. Patricia's legal troubles didn't end with the HOA case. The investigation into the misappropriated funds revealed that she had been running a similar scheme in her previous community before moving to Lakeshore Estates. She ultimately received 2 years of probation, paid $87,000 in restitution, and was barred from serving on any community board or in any fiduciary capacity for 10 years. Last month, I finally bought the small fishing boat I'd been dreaming of when I first built the dock. It's nothing fancy, a 16-foot aluminum craft with a quiet electric motor, but it's perfect for early morning fishing or evening cruises around the lake. I named it Riparian Right, a small inside joke that never fails to make my neighbors smile. The most unexpected outcome of this whole saga was how it transformed our community. Before, people largely kept to themselves, afraid of running afoul of Patricia's arbitrary rules. Now, we have monthly community events, shared maintenance of common areas, and a genuine sense of neighborhood camaraderie. Eleanor Jameson, whose water garden had once been fined, now heads our community beautification committee. She's helped residents create environmentally friendly landscapes that actually improve the lake's water quality rather than detract from it. Robert Chen, another lakefront neighbor who supported my initial stand, established a neighborhood watch program that doesn't focus on reporting violations, but rather on keeping the community safe and assisting elderly residents. The sense of ownership, both literal and figurative, has spread beyond the lakefront properties. Even residents without water access have taken more pride in their properties and the community as a whole. Volunteer participation in community projects has tripled. Perhaps the most telling sign of change came last election day for the HOA board. We had more candidates than positions, something that had never happened under Patricia's regime when she had to beg people to serve. Residents actually campaigned on platforms of community improvement rather than strict enforcement. My dock has evolved over time. I've added a small roof over part of it to provide shade during the hot summer months. Solar-powered string lights give it a magical quality in the evenings. I've hosted dozens of sunset gatherings, fishing lessons for neighborhood kids, and even a marriage proposal. They said yes. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had received that first violation notice and simply complied. How much longer would Patricia's scheme have continued? How many more homeowners would have been unjustly fined? How much more money would have been diverted to personal projects? It's rare that standing up for something as seemingly trivial as a wooden dock can lead to such far-reaching changes, but that's exactly what happened in Lakeshore Estates. One small act of resistance exposed years of corruption and transformed an entire community. The lake itself seems healthier now. With proper management and environmental practices, water quality has improved. Fish populations are thriving. Herons and egrets have returned to the shoreline, adding to the natural beauty that drew me here in the first place. This spring, we established the Lakeshore Estates Scholarship Fund using the interest from our more responsibly managed HOA reserves. Each year, we'll provide $2,500 to a graduating high school senior from our community who demonstrates commitment to community service and ethical leadership. The first recipient was Melissa's daughter, Emma, who plans to study environmental law. During her acceptance speech at our community picnic, she said something that brought tears to my eyes. I learned from my mom and from watching our community transform that one person standing up for what's right can change everything. As I sit on my dock writing this, watching the sunset paint the lake in golden hues, I can see half a dozen other docks along the shoreline. Each represents a small victory for property rights and community self-determination. Each stands as a reminder that rules should exist to improve communities, not control them. Building this dock cost me about $600 in materials, thousands in legal fees, and countless hours of stress. But it also gave me something priceless. A true community where neighbors look out for each other, where rules make sense, and where the view from my backyard isn't just beautiful, it's mine. If there's a lesson in all this, perhaps it's that sometimes you need to build something worth fighting for, even when others try to tear it down. In my case, it was a simple wooden dock. For you, it might be something entirely different. But whatever it is, know that standing your ground can ripple outward in ways you never imagined. The lake is calm tonight, reflecting the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. From my Adirondack chair on the dock that started it all, I can see the community I helped rebuild stronger, fairer, and more connected than before. Tomorrow, I'll take my boat out for an early morning fishing trip, and no one will find me for it.